I stood in the narrow hallway, half hidden behind the old wooden doorframe, my hands gripping a tray of freshly baked cookies. The smell of vanilla and butter still hung in the air. I'd baked them because my daughter loved them as a child. She used to sit on the counter, giggling as she licked the dough from the spoon. Now she was all grown up, married, living her dream in this house I had helped them buy. Their laughter drifted from the living room, light and careless. It warmed me for a moment. I smiled, ready to walk in and surprise them. But just as I took a step forward, her voice, sharp and cold, cut through the air. "This old woman is ruining our lives. I'm sick of her." I froze. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. The words seemed too cruel, too impossible to come from my daughter's mouth. The girl I had raised with bedtime stories, who once cried if I was 5 minutes late picking her up from school, was now talking about me like I was a burden. The tray shook in my hands, the metal clinking against my trembling fingers. A few cookies slid off and fell to the tiled floor, scattering crumbs like broken memories. My heart pounded, each beat echoing louder than their laughter. Her husband said something in a low voice, but I couldn't make out the words. My daughter sighed heavily. "She just sits around, making everything awkward. I can't live like this anymore." The air left my lungs all at once. I pressed my palm to my chest, struggling to breathe quietly, afraid they might hear me standing there. My throat burned, my eyes stung, but I forced myself to swallow back the tears. I wanted to burst in, to tell her everything I had done for her, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the pride I felt watching her grow. But my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, invisible in my own daughter's home. When I finally turned away, the hallway seemed longer, colder. The cookies on the floor looked like a small, silly tragedy compared to the ache in my heart. I bent down slowly, gathering the broken pieces one by one, whispering to myself, "It's all right. She doesn't mean it, she can't mean it." But deep down, I knew she did. That evening, I sat alone at the small kitchen table, the dim yellow light flickering above me. The rest of the house was filled with the sounds of clinking silverware and quiet conversation. My daughter and her husband were eating dinner together in the dining room. They hadn't called me to join them. Maybe they thought I preferred solitude. Maybe they just didn't notice I hadn't eaten. In front of me sat a bowl of soup, already gone cold. I stirred it slowly, watching the thin layer of steam fade away. My appetite had vanished the moment I heard her words that afternoon. "This old woman is ruining our lives." They echoed again and again, as if the walls themselves were whispering them back at me. I thought about all the ways I might have ruined anything. Was it because I forgot things sometimes? Because I cooked too much? Or because I asked too many questions about their day? I had given up my home, so they could have a bigger one. I'd sold my favorite armchair, the one where I used to rock my daughter to sleep. I'd even cashed out my small savings to help with their down payment. All because I wanted them to be comfortable, happy, safe. Now, I was just an inconvenience. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, filling the silence that grew heavier with each passing minute. Tick, tock, each sound felt like a reminder of time slipping away, time I'd spent loving her, time she no longer valued. A small laugh drifted in from the dining room. Her laugh. For a fleeting second, I imagined she was laughing with me, like we used to. But no, it wasn't me this time. It hadn't been for a long time. I took a small sip of the soup, its taste dull and empty. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from holding in the ache that threatened to spill out. The kitchen window reflected my face back at me, a tired woman with lines of love and years etched into her skin. I used to see pride there, warmth. Now, all I saw was someone who had overstayed her welcome. I folded my hands together, whispered a quiet prayer, one for strength, not anger. Because deep down, even after those words, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. She was still my daughter. My little girl. And a mother's heart doesn't stop loving, even when it breaks. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting soft stripes of gold across the kitchen floor. I was already awake before dawn, as always. Habit, I supposed. Old women wake early, not because they must, but because the world feels quieter before everyone else begins to move. I moved slowly, my joints stiff but steady, as I set about making breakfast. The smell of eggs and coffee filled the air, and for a moment, it almost felt like any other morning. Almost. I placed 2 plates neatly on the counter for my daughter and her husband, toast just the way they liked it, with a touch of butter and honey. I didn't make a plate for myself. Somehow, I wasn't hungry anymore. As I packed their lunches, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window again. The woman staring back looked older than I remembered. Her eyes were tired, yes, but there was something else there, something that looked a little like acceptance. Maybe even peace. The clock ticked past 8. My daughter's hurried footsteps came down the stairs. She was dressed neatly for work, her hair tied up, her perfume faint but familiar. Once, I would have told her how beautiful she looked. Today, I kept quiet. She moved quickly around the kitchen, avoiding my gaze, her voice clipped as she asked, "Is the coffee ready?" "Yes, dear," I said softly, handing her the mug. Our fingers brushed, and she flinched, though she tried to hide it. I pretended not to notice. Her husband entered, adjusting his tie, smiling politely at me. "Morning, Ma," he said. I smiled back. "Good morning, son." My daughter's eyes darted toward him, then toward me. Guilt flickered there, just a flash, but I saw it. She opened her mouth to say something, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain, but instead she just sighed. "We're late," she muttered. As she turned to leave, I found myself saying, "Drive safely." My voice came out calm, steady, almost too kind. She stopped in the doorway for a moment, her hand tightening around the strap of her purse. Without looking back, she whispered, "Okay," and stepped out. When the door closed behind them, silence fell again, thick and heavy. I stood there for a long while, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. The house felt emptier than ever. I looked around, the photos on the wall, the vase she bought me last Mother's Day, the chair where I used to sit and braid her hair when she was a little girl. How quickly time erases the warmth of those moments. I sank slowly into that same chair now, tracing my fingers along the armrest, remembering her small hands clutching mine. Back then, she couldn't fall asleep unless I sang to her. Now, she couldn't even stand to have me near. A tear slipped down my cheek, uninvited. I wiped it away before it could fall any further. "It's all right," I whispered to the empty room. "She's just tired." She doesn't mean it. But even as I said it, a quiet voice deep inside me knew the truth. It wasn't just tiredness, it was distance. A distance that love alone could no longer bridge. That afternoon, the house was silent except for the soft creak of the wooden floorboards under my feet. My daughter and her husband had gone out, and the empty rooms echoed with the kind of quiet that used to comfort me, but now it felt like loneliness in disguise. I stood in the doorway of the guest room, my room, and looked around. It was small but cozy, floral curtains, a faded rug, a few photographs on the dresser. Photographs that told a story only I seemed to remember. I sat on the edge of the bed and let my eyes wander over the picture frames. One showed my daughter at her 5th birthday party, frosting smeared across her cheeks as I laughed behind her. Another, her graduation day, her arms wrapped around me tightly, saying, "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom." My fingers brushed the glass gently. When did those words stop being true? The thought lingered in the air as I reached for my small suitcase, the one I'd brought when I moved in with them. It still smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets I kept inside. I began folding my clothes carefully, one piece at a time. Each item felt like a little goodbye. The warm cardigan I wore when I first held my granddaughter, the shawl my late husband had given me years ago. I pressed it to my chest for a moment, closing my eyes as his voice echoed in my memory, "You're the heart of this family." The heart, maybe, but hearts get tired too. My hands trembled as I picked up the small baby blanket from the drawer, the one I'd kept all these years. It was yellowed from time, soft and fragile, much like me. I remembered the night I wrapped her in it for the first time, promising her silently that I would protect her, always. I folded it slowly, tears blurring my vision. Then I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd eaten alone the night before, and wrote a short note on a piece of paper. My handwriting shook, but the words were clear. "You're right, dear, I don't want to ruin your life. Be happy. I love you, always." I placed the note on the counter beside the vase of wilting flowers she'd brought home last week. They were once bright red, now they hung limp and brown, petals falling one by one. I put on my old coat, the one with the worn cuffs, and tied my scarf around my neck. Before leaving, I took one last look around the living room. The couch where she and her husband laughed together, the shelf where my books now sat untouched, and the framed family photo hanging crooked on the wall. My eyes lingered on it for a moment, 3 smiling faces frozen in time, before everything changed. The door clicked softly behind me as I stepped outside. The air was cold, crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves. The wind brushed against my face, making my eyes water. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it wasn't. I stood at the gate for a moment, looking back at the house I once thought I'd grow old in. Then, with a deep breath, I turned and walked away. Each step felt lighter, though my heart ached with every beat. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving behind the pain of not being wanted. The sun was setting when I finally settled into my new room, a small, tidy space at the local care home just a few blocks away. The walls were pale blue, the bed neatly made, and a single vase of fresh daisies sat on the windowsill. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and warm tea. It wasn't home, but it was quiet. Peaceful. I sat by the window, watching the light fade into the soft pink of dusk, and for the first time in days, my heart felt strangely calm. The sound of footsteps in the hallway echoed faintly, followed by the nurse's gentle voice. "Would you like your tea now, Mrs. Carter?" she asked. "Yes, dear, thank you," I said softly, smiling at her kindness. When she left, I took a slow sip, savoring the warmth that spread through my chest. The ache hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, like a bruise that still hurt when pressed, yet no longer bled. I was tracing circles on the rim of my teacup when the door suddenly burst open. My daughter stood there, breathless, her face pale, eyes red and glistening. She held my note in her trembling hand. "Mom," she gasped, voice breaking, "please, don't do this. Don't leave." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the same little girl I'd once comforted after nightmares, the same child who used to cling to me at the school gate, begging me not to go. Only now, she was the one afraid of being left behind. "I thought you'd be happier without me," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake, it was just tired, like the wind after a long storm. She dropped to her knees beside me, clutching my hands as if she could hold time still. "How could you think that?" she cried. I was angry, stupid. "I didn't mean it, Mom. I didn't mean any of it." Her tears fell onto my hands, warm and heavy, and I felt my own eyes sting. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was no longer painful, it was healing. Slowly, she rested her head on my lap like she used to as a child. I stroked her hair, my fingers trembling through the strands. "You just stopped seeing me, sweetheart," I whispered. "But I never stopped being here. I never stopped loving you." Her sobs grew softer, fading into small hiccups. "I know," she said, her voice muffled. "I know, Mom, I'm so sorry." Outside the window, the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky. I glanced at them and smiled faintly, feeling a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt in a long time. The kind that comes when something broken finally begins to mend. I held her face in my hands and wiped her tears away with my thumbs. "Let's start again," I said softly. "No blame, no anger, just love." She nodded, pressing her forehead against mine. "I'll never make you feel unwanted again." And for the first time in years, I believed her. As the nurse passed by and peeked in, she smiled quietly at the sight of us, mother and daughter, two hearts finding their way back to each other. I leaned back in my chair, still holding her hand, and watched the last rays of daylight fade beyond the window. The world outside was calm again, and so, finally, was I.